Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Isabelle Knight, and I am the middle grade fantasy author of the Enchantria series.
I'm Agnes Crisler, a young adult romance author, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for, being here.
hmm so I have about 9 questions for you on writing and your books and things. So the first question would be in the writing and inspiration section. What inspired you to create the world of Enchantria? Did you have any specific influences?
Yeah, that is a really great question, and I think the answer is, just a lot of things, really, because Enchantria was an idea that, well, it was an idea that had just always been in my head for quite some time, even ever since I was like around 6 or 7 years old, and I just always had this idea of like two kingdoms, and one was, I guess, good, and they had guardians to defend the kingdom, and then the other kingdom was evil and dark and full of shadows, and there was this very clear border between those two kingdoms. And, when I started writing out the story and actually, putting all of that onto the page, I drew from a lot of different places. And my friend actually once said that writers are, kind of like magpies. And, quite frankly, I agree with her because, when I started writing Enchantria, I pulled ideas from everything. I like to joke that I stole ideas from all of my favorite books, movies, video games, and also my obsession with crystals at the time, and all of that really went into the book.
hmm
And, some of the specific things that really inspired me were the Warriors series by Aaron Hunter. And it is basically, this very, very long series with many, many arcs. It's like the series about cats, and, they have different clans, and it's a bit hard to explain right now, but it was definitely one of my biggest inspirations. And also the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. I just loved all of the humor in that book, and also just all of the action and adventure. And so I was really inspired to add some of that into my book, including like the quests, because I definitely got that idea from Percy Jackson.
hmm
And I was also quite inspired by my love of things like crystals and unicorns and magic at that time. And, just as a kid, I had always wished that this magic and wonder that I'd seen in movies or TV shows or books, I had always wished that that magic and wonder and whimsy was real. And so I guess in writing this book, I just took everything, all of the magic and wonder and whimsy and fantastical things that I wish existed in real life, and I just put all of that into this book.
hmm That's cool. So you started writing the series at 10 years old. How has your writing style evolved since then?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I'm not really sure how to answer that because my writing style has definitely changed, like a lot. And it's just kind of hard to pinpoint exactly how it's changed because, I just really grew as a writer and had changes of what I was obsessed with, which really changes what I put into my books. But, I guess one way my writing has changed is that while writing the Enchantria series, my writing style was, quite lush and lyrical and descriptive, and I still do love these kinds of descriptions. And, I guess it's less to do with me and more to do with like what specific book I'm writing because, you know, the book I am writing will definitely, change. Like, it is going to change how I write it and what my writing style is really like. And in my work in progress, I'm leaning less towards magical and just like lush forests, lots of magic and whimsy, and more towards very magical, but with a hint of danger and really gritty, fast paced storytelling. And it's not super different from my writing style in from my previous writing style, but it's definitely a bit of a change.
I see. So, what's your favorite part about writing middle grade fantasy?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question because middle grade is just a genre that has been really close to my heart for a long time. It is the genre that I grew up reading. Like I just it's a genre that's really close to my heart, and one of the things I just really love about it is how you can really explore a lot of things. You can have these really deep and emotional themes in middle grade, but at the same time, you can still keep that sort of childlike wonder and adventure. And I guess, another thing I like about writing middle grade has less to do with, I guess, it has less to do with the writing itself and more to do, I guess, with the publishing. And that is that, almost everyone in the kidlit book community is just really nice. I think children's authors are definitely some of the nicest people in the world, or at least the ones I've met. And just, everyone in the kidlit community is just really supportive and kind. So I guess those would be my favorite things about writing middle grade.
That's amazing. So, in the characters and world building section, what character in Enchantria do you relate to the most and why?
Yeah, so I feel like I always get questions like, who is your favorite character? And so I do like this question because it's not who's my favorite character, but which character do I relate to the most? And let's see, I think I might have answered this question in the frequently asked questions section of my blog. I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but I think I said that the character I related to the most was Ronnie, and she is a Starseer's apprentice, and she's, really wise for her age, very kind, tends to ramble quite a bit, and I just really like her, and I just really do, I guess, relate to her, and yeah, but I mean, she's. I probably have a lot of characters in the series that I relate to because all of the characters have some part of me in them. And
Mhm.
so I would say if I could narrow it down to, a few characters, I would say Ronnie, Eleonora, Arabella, and Talia.
I see. That's awesome. So, how do you approach world building? Do you start with the magic system, the setting, or the characters first?
That is actually kind of hard to say, and I guess it really just depends on which book I'm writing because, my writing process really changes for every book, including, how I build the world. But I guess I usually start with the world first. The world is almost always what comes to me. The world and the conflict that is happening in the world, and after that, I come up with the characters and the plot. And I never really plan out my world beforehand because almost always, I just start out with this general idea of the world and its main conflict. And after that, I do not do any more planning. I will just write the first draft and discover the world along with the characters.
Okay, that's awesome. So, in the publishing and advice section, was the biggest challenge in getting your books published?
Ooh, let me see. That is a really great question. And, because I am an indie author, and that basically means independently published or self published, and that means I did not have to go through a million rejections from agents and editors and publishers to get published. So I think that is one of the challenges people usually have in publishing their books that I personally didn't really have. But I think the hardest challenge in getting my books published was really just getting people to read them because as an indie author, I mean, yes, you do have lots of control, but you know, everything is down to you. You do not have the support or distribution that traditional publishing usually offers, and just everything is on you, including book covers, making your own book covers, or hiring a cover designer, formatting, marketing, IFBNs, and all of that. And it's definitely tedious, and it is just much harder to just distribute your books and get your books into bookstores. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that was probably the hardest part.
What advice would you give to young writers who want to create their own fantasy worlds?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking this question because, I have a lot of advice I could give to young writers, and I actually do plan to hopefully someday write a craft book on writing so that I can just put all the advice I have in there. But to just select one, I would say to just write. Because, you may not know anything about the industry or about the craft of writing. You might not know exactly how to craft a perfect character arc or the right place or the right place to have all of these plot twists or this exact story structure. I would say that is perfectly fine because you are just starting out and just starting to discover your own voice and your own story, and you do not need to know every aspect of publishing or the craft of writing. All of that can come later, and I think the best way to learn is to really just start writing and to really hone your creativity, your imagination, and discover what makes your writing yours. And also, of course, don't give up because a lot of people already say this, but I think this is just very important because the publishing industry is hard, even as an indie author. And you'll definitely run into people who don't believe in you. You'll definitely, have setbacks. But I really do believe that, if you have a story to tell, if you have, imagination, determination, patience, and a slight sprinkle of insanity in a good way, of course, then you can do this because, you might also hear a lot of people who will say things like, you have to write for the market, or you have to follow these exact rules in writing, and only by following this exact story structure will you get a good book. And I would say that that is not entirely true because, there really aren't any rules for writing because, two pieces of writing advice may totally contradict each other, and you just really need to write, to just start writing and discover what works for you and what your own, writing style really is.
That's really good advice. So, last question. Can you share any hints about future projects you're working on?
Yeah, so Enchantria is definitely not going to be my last book, and I'm currently working on a middle grade fantasy action and adventure. And because, I am still struggling through the second draft, I can't share too much about it, but I will say that it is a middle grade fantasy action and adventure novel with magical steeds, elemental magic, and storms. And it will hopefully appeal to fans of the Skandar series by A.F. Stedman, and also the book, what was it called? Spark by Sarah Beth Durst. And I also have plans for future novels, and I guess they're not really plans exactly, but more like novels I really would like to write. And so some of those involve an idea I had for a very long book series that is just as long and epic as Keeper of the Lost Cities, which frankly I'm just too scared to write because it is, I know this is that idea for a book that is going to be a very long series, very complicated with a lot of characters and plot twists and all of that. And so, yes, I do want to write it someday, but I'm kind of scared too. And I also have a middle grade fantasy in mind about foxes, and it also involves elemental magic. And I also really want to write a spooky dark fantasy someday.
That's awesome. It sounds like you got a lot of plans.
Yeah, definitely. And so, thank you for all of those questions. And I also, have a few questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first one is, how did you really get started off as a writer? What was it that just really inspired you and made you want to become one? And did you want to be a writer when you were younger?
Those are great questions. I got started off at writing. I just kind of started telling stories when I was young, and then one day I really just wanted to write it all down. And as for like what inspired me and maybe want to become a writer, I kind of got really back into book reading when I was like probably 11 or 12, and I really just like I became obsessed with the idea of becoming a writer. I just loved it so much. I didn't always want to be a writer. Actually, when I was younger, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but over time, I kind of just really fell in love with like the talent of making stories and actually getting them out there in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is definitely something that has happened to me because, when I was 11 or 12, I also became an avid reader. And, when I was younger, I think I did want to be an author, but I didn't really take it seriously.
Hmm.
Yeah. But, what are some of the things that inspire you in your writing?
Ooh, I love that question. I think that would probably have to be seeing other writers and all their dedication in the writing and just thinking like when you see a book on a shelf, you think how like hard it was for that person to write that book, how many hours they put into it, how many nights they stayed up thinking about it, what free moments they did it, probably jotted random things down in napkins in restaurants. It's just an amazing like inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what okay, sorry, I lost track of the questions. Sorry. So, I think you may have answered this in the previous question, but how do you find the motivation to keep going during a tough writing day?
Kind of similar to the last answer. Anything I'd
Yeah.
probably have to add is every single word counts. So even if I just write one word down, it still counts and it still gets helps get that draft finished.
Yeah, that's definitely a really important mindset to have, especially since, sometimes there are days when, people just can't write as much, even though we would love to just sit at our desks all day and hammer out words.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, life sometimes gets in the way. And so I think that mindset of just, every word counts, even if it's just one word, I think that mindset is really important to have. And so, what do you think is the hardest part about writing?
Oof, that's a really big question. Probably the realization of how hard it will be to publish like a novel. I'd like to publish my actual novel self-published. And also just the process of getting it ready for marketing is really I've realized recently that it's a lot harder than it seems, like getting the book hyped up and finding readers and editors and all things like that. I think that's probably one of the hardest things. And the other part would probably be when you see people that don't believe you or support you in your writing. That can be really hard sometimes, but there's always at least one person that keeps you going, and that's nice to have.
Yeah, definitely. I agree because, I am already published and I can definitely say that publishing, it is hard. It is definitely not easy, but I think it is, definitely one of the things that if you put in enough work, it's really worth it. And I definitely agree with you about, having at least one person there to cheer you on and support you because, I think just even having one person to just, cheer you on and support you, even when others don't believe in you, can be really important. So I definitely agree with you on that.
Mhm.
And so, what do you think is the most surprising thing that has ever happened to you in your writing?
Ooh, I'd probably have to say when recently, a couple weeks ago, I went back to look at my NaNoWriMo draft from last year. And that's when I first started getting really serious about writing. Like I was dedicated to that book. And I noticed that my dialogue was really well written.
but everything else wasn't so great. And it's interesting to see how my writing as a whole has evolved since then. Like it's kind of changed a little bit. Like it's definitely improved. I will say that at least. It's definitely improved a lot, but more than it was.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that was definitely like the same for me because, actually, I actually once did I did like give my sisters a second draft of my book to read, and the second draft, it wasn't bad. I mean, it was certainly much better, a million times better than my first draft, but it definitely was not as good. And I think she actually also mentioned that like she really liked the dialogue of that book. So,
Hmm.
yeah. And, can you tell us a bit about what project you're working on and how you got the idea for it?
Oh, sure. So I'm actually trying to finish the project. It's a young adult romance book. It's a summer themed romance book. It's about a young street musician who meets a famous pop star. The trope is enemies to lovers. And I just really enjoy writing like happy romance stories. I mean, not all of them are happy for that I write, but some of them that are happy make me happy to write. Like they're just enjoyable. Um, Let me think. And the idea I got for it, I was reading a book called Geekerella. I unfortunately do not remember the author who wrote it, but it was different. But I like the idea of having the one person's a celebrity and then the other person's kind of in the background. Like, I like that kind of balance in characters, so I kind of made my own version of it, but the book is very different. But I liked the way the book was laid out in the other one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is something that a lot of writers have, and I actually have heard of Geekerella. I also, unfortunately, do not know the author's name, so sorry about that. But I haven't read it, but I have definitely heard of it, and it does look like a really interesting book. And so, what's your advice for young writers or, writers of any age who really want to start writing and get their books out there?
I could go on and on about this for a long time, but just to sum it up, first of all, keep writing. Even through the thick and the thin, there's going to be days where you think your writing's great, and that's good for you. And there's going to be days where you think your writing's bad, and that's completely normal. Just don't give up. Keep writing and keep going. It's good to practice and try to find other authors to look up to where you can understand their processes. Try to watch videos if you can or take classes. If you can't, that's okay. If you read, a good thing to do is to study the books, the way they're written, kind of like really look at them more in depth. And I think that's
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and I think that is some great advice for young writers. And, thank you. Those are all of the questions that I have for you today. So thank you so much for being here to, answer those questions and also for interviewing me as well.
Yeah, that was really fun. I'm really happy that you could make it.
Yeah. And, good luck with, your own book. I am sure it'll be fantastic because, I've read a few snippets of it and I think it is really good.
Likewise, I'm sure your book will be amazing and hopefully someday become a bestseller.
Yeah, well, we can always hope for that. And, thank you guys for, watching or, well, technically listening to this interview. I really hope you guys found something interesting or enjoyable in this interview. And I also hope that I just hope that you took something away from this interview. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And, yeah, I suppose I shall see you again in the next video.